Anti-social media. Thank you, Haripriya, for joining us today and accepting our invitation. Before we start, Anukriti will introduce our speaker of the day. Yeah, Anukriti.
Good evening. I would like to welcome all of you to today's talk. The title of the talk is Dear Nationalists, Writing Poetry in Anti-Social Media. Our speaker today is Dr. Soibam Haripriya. Soibam Haripriya is a Fulbright-Nehru Postdoctoral Fellow 2021. She was an FWO Postdoctoral Fellow at the Department of Conflict and Development Studies, Ghent University. She is also a poet. Her research examines the scope of poetry and fiction in social anthropology, especially in the context of writing ethnography in violent times. She has taught at the Center for Sociology and Social Anthropology, TIS Guwahati, and Gender Studies program at Ambedkar University, Delhi. In today's talk, Dr. Haripriya draws from her experience of being gender trolled for a poem written by her titled Dear Nationalists that was shared on Facebook. This talk is being recorded and a recorded video will be available on our YouTube channel. Without any further delay, I hand over this session to Dr. Haripriya. Welcome.
Thank you, Anukriti, and thank you, Papuri and Navneeta, for inviting me to be a part of this series organized by the Center for Women's Studies. Without much ado, let me begin by reading out this poem of mine titled Dear Nationalist, on which I base today's talk. Let me do a screen share so that is this visible?
Yeah, it's starting. Yeah, it's visible now. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the poem on which I base today's talk. It's titled Dear Nationalist. Nationalist of any hue, nationalist of every hue. You are all saffron to me. I would, if I could, have conversations with you, fill town halls with arguments, but your words only reach through hate mails, arrive late at night through made up names and real threats. You ask me the nationality of my vagina. You fear in its chasm lies the key to the community's downfall. Of course, you are the true warrior, anointed by none but yourself. Warrior, my vagina is my own battlefield. My body in every inch, every darkness is mine. I know logic slips away from you. For that, I'm filled with no anger, but sadness for you. So this is the uh, so on the 15th of July 2017, I had shared this poem on my Facebook page. Not long after, an acquaintance of mine shared the poem and initiated an online call in the same social networking site asking for me to be trolled. And possibly responding to her call, a status was shared on Facebook, which ended with this statement: the sensitivity in her, which I see in her writing, has been directed deep, deep in her vagina. She being cultureless and ahistorical and having been dehumanized. A bare life, depoliticized and drained of spirit, she's just a walking genital today, a box. So and after sort of after all these trolling that happened to me based on me uploading this poem on Facebook, I this particular poem and four other poems were subsequently published in this webzine called Riot, and I titled it as Dear Nationalist, 5 poems, and this was published and after I first shared it a few days prior to this on Facebook. So on then after this poem got published in this webzine, the cascade of trolling, uh, I show you a brief of some of the trolling statuses that was, if you can see my screen. So on the
Yes, we can.
on the 22nd of July 2017, this profile SL shared a post of KM, which was a news report titled BSF Jawans allegedly raped Chakma tribal girl, pour acid on her face. And KM used a line from my poem, which became a trolling phrase directed at me. Hashtag her vagina, her battlefield. Further sharing this post of KM, SL added, I pray to dear Lord that something of the kind happen to her very soon. So this, I'm just like showing you some of the sort of trolling that I was subjected to because of this poem that I had shared and written and shared. And so the my experience of being gender trolled lasted for a few months, beginning from July 2017. The precise end of the trolling, I'm sorry, I request, I think there's someone's audio is interfering.
Yeah. So please keep your, audios on mute. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So my experience of being gender trolled lasted a few months. It began in July 2017. The precise end of the trolling is unclear to me because I had blocked all the accounts of the trolls and had requested friends to stop sending me screenshots of those statuses. So what I do in this talk today is I try to understand this experience of being trolled and this, toxic masculinity as an out of proportion reaction to the poem that I'd shared on Facebook, and further to my audacity of getting it published. It will not be possible for a poet to examine her own poetry and decipher its meaning. So that's not the purpose of my talk today. Rather, what I'm trying to do today is trying to read the antagonism against the literal presence of a voice. And in this instance, which is manifested as trolling and rape threats due to the willful misreading of a poem. And if I look at scholars who have looked at gender trolling, I take from Mentila's work where she describes trolling as, and I quote, it expresses sincere belief held by the trolls, and it is not simply for their own amusement or because he or she was a genuinely quarrelsome, abrasive personality. Close quote. So if I look at that, if I look at that there are some beliefs held by the trolls, and it's not just trying to pick a quarrel with me, then in trying to understand these reactions, however disproportionate these reactions are, how can I'm trying to understand how, if I explore how a poem is perceived, and if I explore what is the part played by language in how a poem is received by the audience, and this effect elucidated by it, whether I can understand and place this experience of trolling in some context. And I bring in language here because it is partly there's a consumption of work written in English that plays a role in its readership, and also, of course, the medium in which it was shared. That is Facebook. Facebook has these mediums have this tendency of proliferating, right? So I'm trying to sort of look at these concerns today. And I divide today's talk into two sets of concerns. Firstly, so I explore the relationship of English to other local languages to understand the emotive appeal that local language / mother tongue has. And I'm also trying to sort of place this emotive appeal in a relationship with Northeast Indian Anglophone literature, and whether this kind of emotive appeal complicates the reception of Anglophone literature, and whether it leads to an antagonism against writers who do not write in their mother tongue, right? And also, on the other hand, we also have this idea that works written in English are, they are regarded as poor translation of the milieu the writers belong to, right? So even while I try to understand the vitriolic comments on the internet, and I try to also think that these are not an in-depth study of the ideas that we put forward in that medium, but my experience of being trolled also evoke a different set of issues, such as that of language loyalty, leading to an understanding that writings in English reveals a lack of rootedness, right? So, and also, of course, on the other on the hand, we also have related issues of nationalism and identity embedded in language as a cultural property, right? So this is one set of concerns that I want to raise in today's talk. The second set of concerns that I would like to explore in today's talk is around the prejudice against women's writing and its reception in online media by jingoistic elements that inevitably manifest as sexist outrage, right? Hate as an effective network in the online world is not disconnected from the polarized realities one live in. But the manifestation of hate in the social media seem to be an act that is usually outside the purview of the law. So that has a set of consequences, or that is supposedly a consequence-free kind of uh, uh, manifestation. So and also we have this that I mean, all of us who are engaged with women's studies know this, that writing back to the nation by marginalized selves is a tricky business. And um, and vitriolic nationalism seems to justify acts of trolling, and the online media amplifies this network of hate by multiplying the violence that poets and writers are subjected to. So these are the concerns that these two small set of concerns that I wish to address today. So I come to the first part of my talk, where I centrally try to explore in what language should the poem be written. The relationship of English to local slash vernacular slash regional languages, and the relationship between local languages that mirror the language chauvinism of major and minor languages, such as the many ways in which language prefigures questions of identity and ethnic nationalism. Writings in English already render a meaning of disloyalty to the mother tongue, or at least invites an opinion of being alien or reveal a lack of rootedness. And this question was already posed to us during a book discussion on the anthology I was part of. This is an anthology titled Tattooed with Taboos. The choice of bringing out an anthology in English rather than the mother tongue, and whether English can speak of the milieu of the poets of the anthology, was a question that I certainly was not able to address comprehensively at the time the query was posed to me. But this question is interesting in the context of the smaller language communities in Northeast India. Northeast Indian Anglophone literature is marginalized due to this notion of lack of rootedness, so much so that Anglophone literature is already as if, it's taken as if it's already an act of translation. So, for instance, in the review of our anthology, there was a review which was, I think there was a website called Seven Sisters Post earlier. It does not exist now, and the review was published there. So the review is titled "Talent Robbed in Translation," and I quote from the review: "For a very long time, not for a very long time, Indian English literature, especially the literature produced from non-metropolitan areas, has been criticized for exhibiting a ruggedness of translation. Sadly, many of the poems in this collection suffer from this drawback. The translation of thought from the languages of Manipur to English is not very smooth and betrays the process. Some of the phrases are out of place, and in some places, the idiom seems borrowed directly from the mother tongue." So, this was, how this is a snippet from the review of the anthology. So, which is, so I use this to sort of say that already works in English produced in the Northeast is already seen as an act of imperfect translations of the milieu or of the idioms. In the case of Manipuri literature within the state, the production of works in Manipuri literature is very vibrant. It is more vibrant as opposed to works published in English. And the latter, which is the works published in English, fail to garner the same reception as Indian English writing does at the, quote unquote, national level. State institutions such as the Sahitya academies continue to actively engage in regional literature. However, with English education, we all know that it's perceived as a privilege and an aspirational desire. So, in this, inevitable that regional languages gets adversely impacted. So, so we have this desire for English as an aspiration, but also we also see that a lot of us are trying to sort of be involved in acts of translation, engage with regional literature. But we also see that if one is a bilingual writer, or a bilingual academic, or a multilingual one, even with exposure to English education, it is those who have the opportunity to belong to strong and vibrant mother tongues that have an edge over those who are comfortable only in one language. Language is an issue of power, irrespective of whether the language is English or an officially recognized local language. And I want to say officially recognized local language is because a local language can also alienate minority ethnicities whose language is not, whose language is not represented in the curriculum. So when we talk about mother tongue, we sort of miss out this point that local language too can alienate minority ethnicities whose language is not represented here. So we have this on the one hand, and we also have the anxiety of regional literatures getting undermined by English medium education, which gives rise to a sort of antagonistic reception of the Northeast Anglophone literature. And this issue gets, entangled with the mother tongue issue. With the rise of modern nation states as well as resistance to its project, mother tongue becomes an emotive cultural property tied up with nationalism and identity. So I sort of see all these conversations when I look at my own experience, and when I reflect on the language I write in and the medium I chose to share the poem, which addresses a specific audience or readership of the poem. My poem was attacked as a work undermining the community. However, no other line was as misread as this line, "My vagina is my own battlefield," as the hashtag "My vagina, my battlefield" demonstrates. This is not surprising, considering that women's expression of ownership of their sexuality and their own body has been one of the most frightening articulation against patriarchies. That and women's articulation of ownership of their body undermines identity boundaries of communities and nations. So, in the willful misreading of saffron nationalism as an attack on the community, it is clear that when it comes to the question of women, both are very similar in how they assert ownership over the bodies of women they consider their own, right? So, this assertion of sexuality and bodily autonomy is met with a call for rape, with the ironic reading that the poem attempts to destroy the body politic of the Métis collective. Right, so this is sort of how I place some of the antagonism, and I'll just quickly do a screen share. Right, so so as I showed this in the beginning of my talk, which is a screenshot of KM sharing a news item of a woman being raped by two personnel of the Indian paramilitary forces in Mizoram, and with the line from my poem, "Her vagina is her own battlefield." Right, the original post contains image of the raped woman, and I and another person, SL, has shared it, saying, "I pray to dear Lord that something of this kind happened to her." Right. So, and after this, what happened was that this image, if you can see this image, is this visible?
Yeah, it's visible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this image of a journal, Eastern Quarterly, guest edited by an independent scholar. This so this image was shared at the time I was trolled, and this is an issue of Eastern Quarterly. And when this image was shared and it started to proliferate and have a life of its own on social media, though my article in the same journal was published in 2012, which was 5 years before my poem was published. Only my name was picked up from the list of contributors and used to shame me as having collaborated with someone named in the Me Too list. The irony of using a movement meant to call out and shame sexual harassers to further harass and shame a woman seemed lost on the throats both men and women. The harassment continued for months, due to which the journal felt compelled to come up with a statement, which stated that, among other things, it stated that the choice of the guest editor has nothing to do with individual contributors. So, in the sharing anything in social media, or the media itself, the medium itself have this, it provides for the possibility of your work being sort of taken out of context, reshared at another moment in time in a completely different context, which is what happened to me, which is what happened to many others as well today, as we see. So for and this I'll discuss these articles in shortly. But for women, so I was picked up. So many people referred back to that article and, said that this article was questioning Métis nationalism, whereas the article was a critique of Métis patriarchy. So and for women, the question of critiquing critiquing identities that one belong to is very tricky business, and the question of being inside and outside a certain community identity is fraught. Identities of women are never complete and self-assured as that of men, and our identities are supposed to shift depending on our marital status, our final status, and the ethnic identity of whom we marry or who we choose to partner with. So, such incomplete identities are also evoked with reference to the body sexuality and the body of work of women. So, and ethnic, and from my experience, I sort of try to argue that ethnic nationalism is also entrenched in a complex system and exists in a shared language of patriarchal meta-nationalisms. So much so that the critique of the latter in my poem was willfully misread as a critique of the former. It will be useful to contextualize my personal experience of trolling in the present structure of right-wing nationalism, which is the subject of my poem, and the competing resisting nationalism, which is an identity claimed by the trolls. I mean, I'm not trying to sort of overemphasize the intent and agency of the trolls, but I'm trying to sort of understand the convergence of social media, which by its very nature provides for seemingly for a consequence-free form of interaction, anxieties of language, identity, and nationalism. So a convergence of both in a particular media. To be sure, all nationalisms are embedded with an understanding of culture, be it ethnic nationalism or a national culture associated with a nation state. Social media becomes a space that disciplines dissenting voices, that questions this culture within and without. The task of writing in the region, therefore, has to perform this tightrope walk between a critique of a national culture presented as homogeneous and the essentialization and glorification of ethnic nationalism and culture. The state increasingly uses draconian laws to silence writers, and trolls equally guard group or community boundaries in the virtual space through forms of online harassment of writers, right? And I'm reminded when I'm trying to sort of work through trying to think through my experience and work on this talk, I was reminded of Jharkhand government's ban of Hansda Sovendrashekhar's book The Adivasi Will Not Dance, and his this also began first as a trolling of as he was trolled in the social media by a group of people for the portrayal of Adivasi women in his book, right? So and I quote from Ortiz, trolling can also function as a cultural mechanism through which groups construct, impose, and defend group boundaries in virtual spaces, which operates as a negotiation of real or perceived social changes. As these results, such as virtual spaces, should be viewed as micropolitical sites where macro-social transformations reverberate through the lives of everyday people. Close quote. So, when I look at look at this imagination of politics and space, and also the space that Northeast Anglophone literature allows for, and the reception of such work, especially by women writers, it needs to be seen in the light of how any work that bears upon or challenges inconvenient truths about identity and nation is received both by right-wing trolls and also by those who describe themselves as ethnic or cultural nationalists. And their reactions uncannily mirror each other. Writings shared in social media leads to an immediacy of reactions. Notions of self and identity are read into these works. So, and the trolls are perceived, or at least they pose themselves as aggressive cultural nationalists against right-wing nationalism, which makes it tricky for others outside the community to comment, right? So, uh, and I say this from my experience when a group of, when a group of people try to uh, do this, try to put up a statement and did a signature campaign. There was that also led to a set of reactions. So on the one hand, what happens is that there's an easy attack on any insider, quote unquote insider voice. And one of the easy attack on voices such as this is that it is appropriated by the ideology of mainland India. That is why you're critiquing the community and blah blah blah. And on the other hand, the trolls project such acts of online harassment as a quote unquote internal matter, right? This is internal to the community. Those outside should not comment. Things are not as simple as they appear, and so on and so forth, right? So any act of solidarity to such an experience as such an experience is sort of seen as it is seen as stemming out of the savior mentality of the mainlander, right? These women belonging to these oppressive cultures have to be safe, right? At least it is sort of seen as such. So the task of writing anything, including poetry, in such a context seems to me burdened with an awareness of an audience looming large, waiting for missteps of words or intent upon deliberate misreading. So it's really a very, like I said, a tightrope walk. You want to critique, but you also don't want that critique to be appropriated in a certain way already, because Northeast is seen as, with a particular lens of problematic lens. So you don't want your voice to be appropriated by that. But also, I mean, those expressing solidarity are also worried about such a representation of, meddling with things which are internal to a community. So that's something that is there. And our awareness of an audience like this, and our awareness of this being already a debate in which we will get mired, is, I think, more pronounced for women writer. And given the gendered nature of nationalisms, where strict boundaries of identities are maintained by policing the sexuality of women, women owning up their body is a threat, women writing is a threat, women thinking is a threat, right? So, and I read the hashtag taken from my poem and thrown back at me as a trolling cry, hashtag her vagina, her battlefield, as a manifestation of that anxiety. This masculinized trolling, to reiterate what is stated at the beginning of the talk, is not participated by women, by men alone. Women actively participated in the online harassment. The trolling began by, one woman posting a status on Facebook and asking for me to be trolled. And at least in there were many statuses that my friends had shared with me. And as if you can see the screenshot here, there a woman referred to me as vagina in my discussion. I mean, some Miss Vagina was also one of the terms. I mean, I was sort of referred to by this by this name. So, and if we look at the sexism and misogynist harassment on ground of hurt sentiments, as well as calling out a previous article of mine in Eastern Quarterly, which critiques Métis patriarchy, as a collaboration with someone named in the Me Too, it, this places the cultural nationalist of the nation state and of the ethnic community in a mimetic relationship. So this instance also exposed the eager willingness of women to participate in sexist treatment of another woman on the exalted cause of nationalism. Critiquing Métis patriarchy, as I do in the article, and toxic masculinity and jingoism masquerading as Indian nationalism, as I do in the poem, is deliberately distorted as an act of challenging the Métis community. So while self-appointed regulators and gatekeepers exist in any given space, the nature of social media engenders harassment to a proportion not known before. So in fact, I went off Facebook for 6 months when, when this was happening to me. Um, and one of the, when I was trying to look at other sort of scholars who has worked on trolling, a lot of them talk about how the anonymous nature of the social networking site provides for provides for such an act. But none of my trolls were anonymous. Only everyone used a real name except the person SL, who used an assumed name. And some of them have many of them had deleted their status after me filing an FIR against SL, but and some of them have closed their account to make new ones under new and assumed names both. But what was interesting for me is to know that none of the trolling happened from anonymous accounts. They were all people with names. They were all many of them were scholars based in universities. So the idea of an anonymous space providing for that space is also something that did not apply to my experience. So, and there is a when we share anything in the social media, there is a unique aspect to that, unique aspect to online writing, in that regardless of the settings of privacy, the text has a potential of not only a long afterlife but also a proliferation to a degree unknown in other media. So the proliferation of online text as viral events is not something that occurs on its own. It can be manipulated in ways that pushes up an online material through responses and sharing within the social media. The interactive nature of social media means it means the possibility of a positive, a negative, or a confrontational, threatening engagement with one's work or opinion, as we have seen a lot in today's times. And all of us who have social media account also understand that in as much as solidarity is achieved, contention too is achieved, right? So, and when I went to the police station to file a case against this trolling, because by after some time the trolling had materialized itself into a rape threat. And when I tried to sort of go to the police station, there was no understanding of an online thread as something, as a thread. The police kept asking me, has it happened in person, right? Have this person stalked you? Has it happened in person? So the law, it took a lot of running around to have a case registered. So the law has been really, really slow in catching up with this space, which is with a juridical understanding of this space. Whereas we know that in other cases, the law can be used quite effectively in online spaces. So it's not so much that there is no juridical understanding of this space, but it is depending on what kind of content is being written, right? One, the so the it's a very tricky business. Certain kinds of writing will be outside the purview of the law, whereas certain kinds of writing will be used against you quite effectively, and you can be you can uh, land up trying to you might be in prison based on, depending on what kinds of content is shared, right? So it's a this space is something that I sort of try to understand, and place the context of online writing in this space. And while it is difficult to equate online community with community per se, and I'm not trying to sort of say that the social networking sites and like Facebook is always a confrontational space and a community is a positive space. I'm not saying that, because prejudices that exist in one extend to the other, and it's not, Facebook is also not a pre-given community. The nature of audience for any status published in this media can only show that one space, prejudices and bias of one space extend to the other. And and also, of course, like I said before, that tools uh, that is embedded in such sites can be used, and it gives us that ease of sharing people's status. And we do not have sort of an etiquette of doing this, right? We make up the rules as we go. There's no sort of common understanding. So all these sort of build towards a media in which there is an ease of multiplicity of text, proliferation of images. And these, I feel, has marked our current time as that of outrage, real or produced for consumption within the same media. Um, though I'm not saying that it is only in the virtual space that outrage exists, right? We also see FIRs being filed against, people for their statuses. So when poetry or any act of writing happens in this online space, there already is a nexus of hate, hate as an effective network which exists in this medium, and it masquerades in my instance, it masquerades as concern for language, identity, and the intertwining of this with nationalism. So, and it is these intertwining that makes it very difficult for quote unquote an outsider to comment on the misogyny, sexism, and violence, taking these issues to be an issue internal to the community, right? So we have, I think, all most of us engaged with women's studies in one form or the other have sort of heard this comment when we talk about, say, ethnic nationalism, that the question of feminism or the question of women should come later. First we have this, first we have this goal of a culmination of nationalism or subnationalism. Only later can the question of women be raised, right? So in such a scenario, it is difficult for an outsider to comment on this, and also as I showed, this is the screenshot, right? So as I showed in this screenshot, right, the many of the trolling reactions were also in Meiteilon. So the switch in language marks it a conversation between insiders. This make it out of bounds for those who do not share the language. And so this switch by bilinguals or multilingual speaker is a careful choice that demarcates a select audience for the exchange, right? So this switch also is interesting because we are marking as, a conversation amongst us, and something that outsiders should not know, right? So in conclusion, I leave with a state of with some sets of queries. Firstly, that is, what does it mean for women to take ownership of their body in a checkered landscape of militarization, where we have laws that where we have laws like AFSPA, which already is an oppressive law, and therefore exist sort of, there is this context of herd masculinity existing in such spaces. And where do we place the body of women in the body politic, right? And these are questions, I think, that still remains to be probed further. The object I pursue in this talk is multi-layered. One is a willfully misread poem, and how social media becomes a vehicle for the proliferation of reactions, and evoke some of the reactions that evoke were, reactions of disloyalty to language, disloyalty to the body politic of the collective, right? So there is a problematic deployment of postmodernism, where, where a written text is all about the reading, right? How the text is read. But there is a violence of misreading that I was subjected to, and how do we probe about this exteriority and interiority of a written text through this act of misreading? And for women writers and poets, I think the question of being inside and outside of a community identity is something that is such a tricky business. And like in the last screenshot that I shared, the idea that certain work or articulation shows the community in bad light to the outside is evoked time and again as a reaction to writings like mine. So so all this sort of points to a question that one of the question that I sort of try to understand my experience through is the question of in what language a poem is to be written. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Haripriya, for this really engaging paper, which is sort of, also I was quite it's also very interesting that you are actually, I think the distance that you have also gained, that you are currently now also bringing like what is at the center of the talk is also something you underwent, right? Like, so, as I mean, I think one of the questions your talk is also raising is about the figure of the writer, and this practice of writing, which has been a long question in some ways when it comes to the question of women writers, where often this conflation between what you write and your very the interiority, or the intimacy of the writer, right? Like that often being sort of push read together, right? Like, so the attack again on your writing becomes an attack on the body of the writer itself, right? And that, I think, with women, like, even if you think of the history of women's writing, like women writing under pseudonyms, there is those questions that come up. But I think, like you're saying, in this particular context, there are shifts that we see, right? One is this kind of connection, or the new economy, or the new world in which writing is happening, right? Like, so what happens to practices of writing when we are writing on Facebook, and then where print might have given a certain material circuit of travel of writing, but today we also it's not just only for creative writers, right? Like, all of us, when we write, or even when we speak, right? Like, I was thinking while you were saying, right, like, even the talk right now, it's it's not possible to even fathom the circuits, right? Like, where because we are constantly recording, so the nature of the proliferation of media at present, what does it do to acts of writing, right? Like, and also then, particularly for the woman writer writing in context such as the one that you are writing in, right? Like, the kind of layering that's coming up there between nationalism, ethnicity, and question of language, like you say, right? Like, the sort of mediations between regional languages and English, and acts of translation that everybody is engaged in, right? Like, not you are engaged in that, the people who are trolling are also switching codes, switching languages, right? Like, so in some senses, then you're presenting us with this very dense network of negotiations, which are, I mean, like you're saying, the question, I think, what I found very interesting to think with is also this question of, then what does it mean to write, right? Like, in this, like, at one point you were talking about this fabric of hate, or this affective network of hate that might meet you, right? Like, so you might be writing about, I mean, because one thing that's so evident is there's a certain kind of way in which you are using a language around the body, around feminine experience, but the same language is deployed in such a vehement fashion, right? Like, to then attack women themselves, right? Like, so what do we do, how do we even understand this kind of use of vocabulary too, right? Like, what happens when say when we've long fought over making a certain words, say, enter into circulation to be able to talk, and then the same language gets deployed to attack, or to silence, right? Like, so how do we how do we enter into this discussion, right? And I think the questions you are asking is very significant for anyone who is writing today, right? Who is voicing, or, I mean, writing not only as, what is, in that sense, what does it mean to voice, or to become visible, or presence in this economy, right? In this mediated moment, right? Like, where we are constantly caught in these tensions, but then this is the world then which we have to inhabit too, right? Like, so how do we then make sense of these transactions? So yeah, I think there's lots to talk about and discuss further, so I'm sure there are questions, so people could ask the questions, or put it on chat, like I can read it out, or uh, but Good. Okay. Yeah. Makan, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Soibam Haripriya. It was really wonderful listening to your talk today. But my only question is, having said all the things that you deserve to be appreciated by everyone who is conscious of the situation in Northeast, but why call it misreading? Because you were constantly using the word misreading of my poem. On the contrary, I would suggest that why can't we call a spade a spade? We know that in society there are people who would not like your poem. For whatever work you do, they would never ever like you. So why call it misreading? I mean, I'm little confused. That's why I would like you to clarify. Thank you.
Would you could respond, and then we can take it. Yeah, I think that's better.
Okay.
Go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Umakant, for your question. I think why misreading is an important question. And why do I call it misreading? Or I actually call it willful misreading. I do not call it just a misreading. And the willful misreading is not, I think it's not related to whether the poem has to be liked or not liked, right? I'm talking about the violence I was subjected to, firstly, and secondly, I read this as a why do I read this as why do I call it a willful misreading, right? So what I'm looking at, and which sorry, I could not explore it to that detail in the talk, is that I'm also looking at my own engagement, and I'm looking at how this reception of a poem written in 2017 gets contextualized with a writing that I did in 2012, right? So I'm thinking of my work as seen, my work as seen as an engagement where I critique certain aspects of the community I belong to. And so I call it a willful misreading because a critique that I had done earlier of Meitei patriarchy is evoked at a particular time, and my poem, which has nothing to do, which I do not direct it at towards a community. I mean, I think the metaphor saffron does the work for a reader to understand whom or what I'm referring to. But I think so I call it a willful misreading because I think it's a misreading where the poem was construed to be about something that it was not. And the statuses. So I unfortunately had to collect a lot of these conversations that was happening around the poem. However difficult it was for me because I had to file the FIR, right? So in the documents that I saw, there was this willful misreading that it was against Naga nationalism and Meitei nationalism. That was in fact one of the discussion points, and this poem has nothing to do with that, right? So I'm thinking of this as a willful misreading to construe or to sort of bring back another writing that I've done, or many kinds of my engagement, to sort of point that this is a woman who this is a woman here who is who is sort of who's I think who has knows whose loyalty, who's not loyal to the community, and if there are issues with the community, right? The Navnita talked about switching codes. So if I had an issue with the community, it should be done in a way, in a discussion that is internal to the community, right? What is bad should be discussed within. It should not be something discussed outside. And the choice of language, that the choice of language in which I choose to articulate does not make it internal, does not make the discussion internal, right? So this is, I don't know if I'm sort of addressing it directly, but this is how sort of I see why I call it misreading and willful misreading. And this has, like I said, nothing to do whether a poem should be liked or not. One should not be subjected to violence for having written. a work, and I try to understand that violence within this layered discussion that is happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, Navneeta.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Haripriya. So I think what you've pointed out in terms of what you just commented is in terms of the disciplining of the women writer, which happens, right, in terms of this particular ideas of ethnic nationalism and the ways in which you said in terms of, not washing your dirty, linen, that sort of a thing, right? Dirty laundry in public, right? And that too in a language which is understood by everybody and which is not internal to the community and all of that. So my question is in terms of, so when we read the poem, right, in a sense, it seems that it is already a response to previous trolling, right? In the sense, what the way you write it, right? Nationalists of any hue, nationalists of every hue, you are all saffron to me. If I could have conversations with you, fill town halls with arguments, but your words only reach through the hate mails, arrive late at night through made up names and real threats. You ask me the nationality of my vagina, right? So clearly it seems as if this is already a response to previous rulings and your previous experience, right, in a sense. So would you tell us in terms of what produced this poem in the first place, in terms of that response? And then, how probably it just added to what you probably were trying to critique in the first place, right?
Thank you, Papuri. I think that's a important point that you point out. Where is the first work coming from, right? A lot of this poem is not. It's not autobiographical in the sense that it's a reaction to. This was 2017. It's a reaction to many of the experiences of my friends, of some of us who are articulate, who raised their voice in public against a wave of nationalism that we all are being subjected to, right? So this is a reaction to an experience which is not mine, right? This is experience that many of us had been subjected to. So I sort of try to address this, and what I sort of what I see in this in the reaction was, I was actually very surprised when I saw that the first person who shared the poem and asked for me to be trolled is actually an acquaintance of mine. So while I had a certain kind of nationalism and nation state, right, and the kind of culture that is imposed in mine, but it is actually people I thought which are which I belong to, both as a political being, like I belong to certain sets of ideas, and I thought these are people with shared ideas that actually trolled me. It was not the it's not the it's not the saffron nationalists that has trolled me, but actually a community I belong to and people I thought I was in a like-minded or conversations or had interactions with before, right? So it was a kind of, I was very surprised at the reception of the poem, and where is the target or the what I had in mind. The subject of the poem was something entirely different.
So, just to carry on that thread of the conversation, I think towards the end of your talk, you were linking this attack, particularly to the fact that what you are writing is about women's sexuality, right? And that this is coming from a space of what you call like a hurt masculinity, right? But then it was also interesting that you also pointed out that women participated in the trolling, right? So how do we then how do we unpack that whole set of this particular particular formations of certain gender regimes that like you're saying, that almost took you by surprise, the kind of attack, right? So now when you are looking back at all this material, right, how are you trying to work through those formations?
Okay, that's a very good question. The so like because the sort of the trolling cry, is that's one particular line is taken from the poem, and when the first set of trolling happened, it was by actually sharing, by sharing a very you know a very sad news, a very violent news of rape by Indian army personnel in Mizoram, paramilitary force in Mizoram. That was how the trolling began. That image was shared quite a lot of time to say to me that it's you sort of, you think that you have ownership over your body, but it's not. One can be raped, right? So I was I was very sort of confused with uh, what is being articulated against me, because is it to therefore say that that one's body is not one's because we belong to a regime where we have uh, the paramilitary, the military forces working under AFSPA. So is it supposedly a reminder to say that while you may articulate your body as your own, it is not, right? So is it sort of, taking that line from my poem and putting it in this context to say that, well, you think that it's your own, but it's not. Whereas what I'm also articulating is that it is my own and it should be so, right? So I think so that is where I bring in the regime and her masculinity in the picture, because of that particular line which was used juxtaposed with an image of a raped woman, which so I sort of see that juxtaposition, and I was trying to understand that what that juxtaposition means, and of course that juxtaposition bring in the military, the location, the context, which is AFSPA, which is disturbed area, which is the fact that that there is this impunity with which something of this sort can happen, right? So which is one of the ways where it is that juxtaposition made me think in those lines of military regimes and hurt masculinity, right? And also and because I articulate as if my body is mine in a situation where it is not, in a context it is not, and therefore I enter, or I sort of am against, or this is read as being against a body politic, and also by some extension it has also become against the community, and therefore I think that is where both that is the trying to sort of uh, uh, make, I think, the where both like in the terrain of hurt masculinity, where women come in, is I feel in this articulation where a lot of where the ownership of the body is something that can happen later. Now once we have a nationalism which is ours, which is a community, an ethnic nationalism. If this question, if this is sort of resolved, then only this thing can come, right? So I don't know what exactly is happening, but I think I read it in that particular juxtaposition of especially because of the image which was shared and juxtaposed with the line from my poem.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, are they, you know, people could, yeah, are they raised hands? Okay, let's see. Okay. Or you could put your questions in the chat box too. That's fine. I can change. Okay, yeah. This way we'll see raised hands. Could also use, if there are broader questions too, yeah, that could also be asked. Yeah, yeah, Makan, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry to come back again,
No.
because I saw nobody was asking a question. See, there has been a very strong retaliation by the state I mean, some of our friends have even left the country because they were women activists. They were seen as working against the state. And we know the violent past in which women have been facing, retaliation by the security forces and also by the community at large. So in such kind of volatile and violent situation, how safe it has been for you and how safe it is for other women activists and writers to keep doing their work? Because I'm really worried. Like, recently one journalist has been arrested under sedition charge, and he had to approach the Supreme Court to seek bail. So, in such kind of threatening situation, how safe it is for you and for other women writers and activists? Because I'm really worried that something might happen to you tomorrow also. And like you, there are many other women activists and writers who are still braving against the all odds and continue writing and working in their field. But I'm really worried. I mean, I'm being partly a human rights activist also. That really concerns me all the time. So I would like to know your response. Otherwise, if you do not want to respond, you can do that. But hopefully, you should respond, because this is one question that has been a concern in some circle at least, and some of our friends have faced the wrath of the state and the society at large. So I would like to know your viewpoint on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Umakan. One would think that no one reads poetry anymore, or one would think that our writings are not. I mean, our writings do not have that big an audience, but it's surprising how anyone can be afraid of a poem. We have seen other writers, we have seen other works, or not just, I mean, not even going to an extent of being sort of hounded out by the state, but the other mechanisms, for example, removing a text from a syllabus, right? Removing a text from the curriculum, because not just questioning the nation state, but I think many of the ways in which operations of various kinds, such as caste operation, or you know or works that criticize the some of the arms of the state, the military, so on and so forth. So it's not just say, I think it's not just arbitrary arrest, which one is wary, because I think most of us in the talk, here today in the audience, also know of at least a friend who have been incarcerated, right? So, but also, not just that. I think it's also the way in which, for example, works. Like, I think when Hansda also lost his job, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so for writing the Adivasi will not dance, which is not, I mean, not calling out the state in that direct manner, but looking at how Adivasi women are looked at, and how the particular socio-political context in which they live, and to articulate that is thought to be a not so nice representation of a woman, right? And it is the people from the community saying that women should not be represented as such, which is to say that women should not be represented in the reality that they live. We should paint only a rosy picture, right? So it's not just, there is, I think the set of worries or anxieties we have is not just concentrated on like a very big idea of the nation state and what it can do, which it does, and which is scary enough. But it's also these various other elements where your work can be removed from curriculum, or where you are not where a woman should not be represented in a certain way, or a woman using her body for labor, and using her body in a labor that is different from the kind how we understand labor is not supposed to be so, right? So there is actually the anxiety, or our fear is very multi-layered in that sense. And I think when and also a point partly related, not related directly to Dr. Umakant's question, but maybe something that I want to flag today is also that I mean, it's partly related to all the discussion that Papure Navnita has raised also, that after I have after this experience of trolling, etc., what happened was that one of the person who had trolled me was a member of the students union, right? And he was arrested, arbitrarily arrested on charges of sedition,
Okay.
on on a because of a post, because of a Facebook status,
Okay.
right? And so it places, so like what, how do I sort of look at this, right? So when some other, when people that I know did a signature campaign to sort of, against this act of arbitrary detention on charges of arbitrary arrest and detention on charges of writing a seditious Facebook status, right?
Mm.
I signed that letter, right? Because I mean, I don't know how to place this, but the like if I'm trolled, or if I would want to file a complaint, and I would want to use these mechanisms which are available to me by the law, however difficult it is to be accessed, right? And if someone has to be caught, I would want the person, I mean, if I want a due process, right?
Yeah.
Because I belong to a militarized context, I do not want arbitrary detention of someone for a seditious comment, right? Because that's a fear that we all live in, and that the two things are separate, right? My battle is, I contextualize it in a particular way, right? And this is another thing altogether, which also impact how, which also impacts the safety, which also impact the way women, yeah, and their everyday is, right, under that militarized structure. So it's, and this compartmentalization, I feel that a lot of women have to do, right? A
Yeah.
lot of women have to support people that they, that they might have support people on a context which, in on a certain set of politics that you sort of agree with, right? And you feel that this is something that should not be done. So it's a kind of, I don't know how to place this, but I just want to sort of bring it out here. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, there are some questions in the chat. Sejal has this question: who are some poets who influenced your writing? And Manishi Mishra has two questions. Could you please inform us about any scholarly work on insider violence against women by insurgent groups in Manipur? If I have to put in context of Assam, violence against women is seen as something done by outsiders. If you could elaborate a bit on this, thanks. So maybe you could
Okay.
talk about it.
Some poets who have influenced my writing, I mean, there are lots. I really look up to works by Thangjam Ibopishak, whose writings are really very, I think you would have heard of. If you have not heard of him, you would have heard of his poem, I Want to Be Killed by an Indian Bullet. It's, the work, his works are really, or The Land of the Half Humans. I feel that he does the task of, I think a poem which discusses something as problematic as a military law should also be something that is, it should not be that because of the subject we should write a shoddy poem. He does the task of writing a very, something that is poignant, that's heart wrenching, that is satirical, and something that really puts the subject into its context. So he, Mem Chobi, there are a set of writings that I really look at as, as role models for me. So and also a lot of short story writers that are currently coming up in Manipur. So and also Ni Devi is a very, I feel, a very good. She is not a poet, but I feel that her short stories is something that is, that is something that speaks also, that places the women in the same scenario. I mean, they sort of, their writing are something that are almost ethnographic in its, in how it sort of look at look at the context. And of course, there are other writers that I have been reading outside of Manipur poets. I, I mean, there are actually a lot to state here. So, but I mean, I don't know. At the back of my head, I'm thinking of say, uh, in the region, I'm thinking of say Mia poetry. That's something that has, that is actually something that I really read, and I feel that it's. I have a poet that whose work I really like. Namrata Pathak is here today, so I think also make it a point to sort of read works from the region, because I think there's a not simply because they're from the region, but I feel there is a way in which conversations between the work happen, right? Shalim's book, Betelnut, I think it's Betelnut City, which is something that I read last year, and I was very, very I admire the idioms, I admire the metaphors that he used in his work, some of the poets. And regarding Manashi's question, right, actually I use the term insider and outsider within quotes. I do not want to use it in in my writing. I do not want to use it in my talk, but it's something that is, for want of a better word, I use the word insider and outsider. And I actually do not know of any scholarly work on this against women by insurgent groups. So, which is, I think, in the talk, which is what I was saying, that a lot of times what happened is that a critique of, say, violence against women within the community, or which exists. There is, I think the last year statistics has a very bad uh, uh, um, male to female ratio in Manipur. It was, and also the domestic violence, the cases of domestic violence, was, the statistics do not present a very nice figure, right? But one of the things, and I think that is how I'm looking at my own work also, that it's, while critiquing something like this, what it's while critiquing something like this, what happens is that there's also a fear that uh, that your voice can be appropriated to show that, okay, these people are savages, these people are, primitive, so on and so forth. So there, an academic work, I think, also suffer for because there is violence, right? There is violence. It's there is no community or society that is free of violence. But how that work is going to be perceived, or how that work will be appropriated to sort of present thing in a bad light, is something, I guess, which is something that we are also quite concerned with, and which will be sort of used in the same way that, I think that Spivak talk about, saving brown women from brown men, right? So some, like a similar formulation, right? So there is a, while violence is seen as something done by outsiders, which is, I feel, because of the militarized setting, because of the impunity with which you cannot speak against those violence, right? But there is violence that exists within. I'm sorry, but I cannot sort of direct you immediately. I do not remember any work which is done in this. I do not remember like a particular scholarly work or book. But if I do come across, I can sort of write to Navnita or Papuri, and it can be shared with you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I think Namrita Pathak has a question. Go ahead, Namrita.
Uh, that was quite an insightful deliberation. Thank you so much, Haripriya. I was just wondering about the role the female body plays in the virtual space. You talked about a particular boom. You talked about a network. You talked about how certain concepts or tags, ideology for that matter, right? They are proliferated in that anonymous, red, very, very gory space. The space does not have a name. So I was just thinking about this, like the female body also to some
extent becomes amorphous, nebulous, shapeless. It's just like it's pushed or squeezed into a particular slot. It can be appropriated by anybody to just serve a particular purpose, right? The body does not have a name. The body does not belong anywhere. It just floats about everywhere, that somebody pulls it down and somebody can do anything to that. So I read your poem, very, very interesting take. Just like one particular construction from the poem was actually pulled out of that, right? And how it was misinterpreted. So that was quite interesting, how the body actually becomes something else, maybe shapeless, or maybe, like just a free floating idea for somebody to take account of, somebody to actually gnaw at, somebody to appropriate to serve a particular purpose. So I'm just wondering, right, why does it happen? And how would you place the female body there, like in that labyrinthine kind of a space, that does not end anywhere. It's just like a dark tunnel, right? There is an excess, there is a spillage. So, like, what kind of a body do we get to see there?
uh, like, okay, I don't know that I mean, am I audible? I'm hearing an echo. Is it okay? Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the I I think, I mean, it's not I of course, the many representations of the women's body, there are representations and representations, right, of the female body. I mean, in art, in in these various spaces. uh, so there, I mean, there are representations and representations, and there are ways of seeing the body, especially the women's body in its, so that is there, right? But I think what what in the particular context of the talk, what I'm trying to look at is how an articulation by a a woman of her own self, of her own body, and what that does, right? How is that articulation received, and how is that articulation sort of thrown back at me to kind of say that, I think one of the scary thing is to say that the woman's body is anything but her own, right? And to sort of, and an articulation that my body is my own, and I choose the battles of this body, is something turned back to say that, well, it's not your own, right? And of course it is not my own in the context, right, in the militarized, it's these various contexts, but it is in these various contexts that we have to seize it back and say that it's mine, right? So it's that tussle that I'm sort of looking at. The body, of course, it's nebulous. It exists in all the forms that say that it exists. But it is, I'm looking like in a particular articulation of what happens when I own it as my own, right? There are reminders that, therefore, it is, I think it's already body co-constituted by all this that you speak about. It's a body, the woman's body is a body co-constituted by gaze, co-constituted by these various things, right? And but that articulation of it being something that is mine and intimate, and it's the home I live in. It is all my experience of the world happens through this body, and it's mine, right? It firstly mine, it's primarily mine, is something that is, I think that is something fearful for it's something that that is scary for, that articulation is scary for those who want to appropriate the body and present it in a particular form, as I don't know, as reproducers of natural, of of national culture, as something that will yeah, it's something that is supposed to reproduce the family. It's something that's supposed to reproduce a community. And of course, this body and this sexuality, if she chooses as her own and do not choose to sort of be a vehicle for the community, what would happen? So right, so it is in that way that I see. And of course, you're right, it's co-constituted by all this, but primarily when I say that it is one's own and presented, and I I appropriate it back to me and I say that it's my own. What kind of sort of repercussion would such an articulation have? right? I'm aware of the context, and I'm aware of the context that I'm reminded of. I engage with that context. It's not something that needs reminding, but I'm speaking from that very context, right? From that very context, that this body is supposed to be mine. It's not supposed to be appropriated for a national culture. It's not appropriated for, it should not be appropriated by policing of borders, because, or a martial law, or, upkeep a certain kind of national masculinity. This mine. It's not to discipline my community. It's not to, it's not all of that, right? But the reminder always come that yes, it is all of that. And that's, I think that's very pessimistically looking, and it's a tragedy of this body that I inhabit. And that's, I mean, this is my primary home, right? This is how I see and feel the world. But yeah, that's, I hope I address it. And question.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh, Papri, you're on mute. Oh,
Hello, Chipriya. Thank you for a very enlightening talk. I did follow some of the events that followed the trolling, but my question is not related to that. You mentioned some of the Manipuri poets, vernacular poets that influenced you, and I think they are very important examples of how effectively and how cleverly also one can critique one's own society. But when I had some, casual conversation with other women poets, Anglophone poets from Manipur, about the comfort level of the language that they choose to write in. In your case, it's English. They are not. They say that it's not a deliberate choice. It's usually a question of comfort also, and and especially with regard to critiquing one's own society, especially patriarchal society like ours. So I just wanted to know your take on that, and just not a very related context, but let's say poets like Thangjami Bopishak himself, or an Anglophone poet like Robin. They have been critical of their own societies also. But I think the vitriol that's usually targeted towards women writers could be because women are also culturally tied to their own societies more than men. I mean, they are usually made to be, they are usually tied, not by their own accord, of course. So, what is your take on that? Yes.
Uh, Thank you so much, Loya. I didn't get the first question, which is on the choice of language.
The choice of language, yes, whether
Okay.
it's because it seems like because this was something a very simple query that I also had regarding the critique of one's own society that may be slightly more easier coming from a language that is slightly distant, slightly removed from the immediate context or from the immediate physical linguistic or physical location of a poet than say someone who is writing in the vernacular. But it's not like vernacular women poets have not written uh, about patriarchy in earlier poems also. It started from 1980s also. So
Hmm.
what is your own location in all this?
Okay, that's an important question. I Loya, thank you so much. I think also it talks about something that Navnita said earlier about the distance and intimacy, and what kind of like the fact that I'm writing this paper now, and I could actually look at the material now, 4 years after that entire experience, after I have gained the perspective of distance, right? And earlier it was just too intimate for me to sit and write, or I was too affected to sort of sit and able to gain that distance to think through it, right? So I think both the issues are related in terms of distance and intimacy. And Loya, when Tattooed with Taboos was published. One of the writers, one Manipuri, one critic whose work I really admire, she had said that it is perhaps possible for you, three of you, to write Tattooed with Taboos because you're writing from Delhi. We were studying in Delhi at that point. So it provides you that distance through which you can gaze and sort of understand it. And I think, well, that might have played a part. And um, I'll try to answer this question also from a particular experience that I had, which is when I first when I had not visited home for, I think, 3 years due to some reasons, and I came to Manipur after 3 years, and I had to go for my field work, and I had to go to Moirang. And there were a number of checkpoints, army checkpoints, on my way to Moirang. And the first thing I noticed, and I'm talking about maybe this also sort of addressed the idea of intimacy and distance. So I kept thinking, why are there so many armed personnel? Why are there so many armed personnel? Because for 3 years I was away from that space, and I was in a space where I didn't have to see this every single day, right? So when this person asked me, show your I-card and tell me where you are going, I said, why do I have to tell you where I'm going? On what grounds am I answerable to you, right? And I had this was and the person whom I don't know, who was next to me, said that, why are you asking these questions? You are not supposed to tell them anything. Don't speak, right? Don't speak to them, and don't use that tone, right? Why are you asking that? And I was quite taken aback, right? But that sort of because this was not a part of that my everyday for some years. So it came out very stark to me, right? So maybe distance and intimacy work in that manner, where we sort of understand certain nuances. But I do sort of I write primarily in English, and I am involved in translation, and I'm very committed to the task of translation. But maybe to a certain extent, I think I've sort of roundabout addressed your question. The second question was on the on I think the second question was also on the writing by women, and how they also address right, they also address patriarchy in their work, right? Yes, of course they do address patriarchy in their work, and I don't see my work as something new or anything. It is just following a part of a collective that has raised these issues. But perhaps you are right in saying that sort of women are attacked more. I don't know about, like, what you said about women being more entrenched in the culture, or women being more sort of or women being read as someone who's supposed to I maybe take on the culture, like like a clean slate. I don't know,
Yeah,
and
somewhat imposed, even if imposed. Yes.
yeah, but and I think when we were discussing what Namrata had asked, I think that's true, that we are taught to reproduce the family and the culture and the community unproblematically. So maybe that's where but I've seen many writers, many Manipuri women poets write the same very thing in Manipuri, and not sort of getting, and their works being accepted too. So
Yes.
so I do not know if that is that thing where the switching code is something that is seen, that is the problematic part of the story here. Whether the fact that these are, if I want to sort of change something, why don't I speak in a way that is sort of within, and we do not wash dirty linens in public. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Papuri, did you have to say something earlier? We didn't hear you. Like, is that? Oh, I don't know if it's. No, no. The same problems happen. Let it be. Let it be. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Are there any further questions or nothing in the chat box? Yeah. Yeah. That's fine, Papuri. We can see you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think we've come to the last question. So thanks a lot, Haripriya, for that really thought-provoking conversation, and for everybody else also who engaged. And I mean, I was also thinking as you were talking that how, in some ways, in both your presentation but also in the conversation that followed, all your different practices also come together, right? Like that, your poetry, but also your ethnographic training. In some ways, it's also interesting to think how that also enables a project like this, right? Like the way you're thinking about the body and, some of those discussions. So I was wondering, whether you want to reflect on that, like, as the, it's not so much a question, but also like, how those, these different practices that you're part of, how that comes together to enable a project like this, right? Like, how do you see that happening?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised this.
Yeah.
I think when when I was trying to sort of, when Papuri asked me to, to be a part of this, and I wanted to sort of think about my experience of being trolled. I was at that. So it's, it's. I was looking at some of the sort of methodology of approaching my own experience, and I was looking uh, at works of autoethnography, and whereas I was not sort of sitting and making notes, and it was just too intimate to me at that point when I was going through, but I was sort of trying to sit through now with the vantage point of distance and look back at at my experience, think through that, reflect on that, and also the material that I had gathered. And the material that I've gathered has been actually not with something like this in mind, but actually to file a case, right? And some of these and many of the materials that I've gathered is also not primarily, right, because I had blocked all the trolls. So it was also something that friends and families have collected on my behalf, because it was too disturbing for me to look at that at that particular point. So I was sitting through and trying to think about whether, how do I approach this to think and make sense. So yes, I mean, the poetry and my sort of practice of poetry remains here, and also thinking through whether ethnography as a methodology count or it does not count, because I was not sitting and making notes at that particular time. Could I say that this is an autoethnographic work? Could I not say it? So that training of social anthropology had helped me sort of make sense of what are the methodology through which I approach my own experience, and whether sort of autoethnography is the way out. And also, of course, also looking at so it's something that, of course, call upon my sort of my different practices of poetry, social anthropology, engagement with fiction. I do read a lot of. I'm in social anthropology, but I'm partial towards literature, and I think that sort of comes through. So it's it is something that sort of try to get something from all these various aspects of my engagement.
No, it's really quite fascinating, because I don't think many people undertake a project like this. No? So we really look forward to reading it whenever you put it out, and so thanks a lot for sharing it with all of us, and helping us think through some of these really intimate questions also that many of us work through at different levels. I think even sometimes while teaching, or so I think some of these contradictions about what is the home, where do you belong, how do you stage yourself publicly, those are questions that come up, right? And Papuri has a question here. I'll just read it out for you. The question you raise in terms of how to speak as a woman, given that women are always spoken form, my ethnic nationalisms and the militarized state, what does it mean to speak as a woman in this context? It's clearly not a liberal autonomous subject.
I mean,
Yeah.
to what does it mean? What does it mean to speak as a woman? Is already a question that I think it's already this like I think someone raised this question, a similar concern earlier. So I think already when I speak as a woman, it's already not one thing alone, right? It's I'm speaking as a person belonging to a particular ethnicity. I'm speaking as a person living in a particular regime, a regime brought forth by a particular law, and I'm speaking in these various registers, right? That's why I wanted to share that experience of, signing this signature campaign against someone who I did not name in my FIR, but someone who was, who had trolled me very viciously, right? So uh, like as a woman, what does it mean to sign on that on that letter and actually wish for the person to be not detained, because we know what happens when someone is detained arbitrarily on charges such as something that on charges of sedition, right? And that is also another set of law that comes into place, right? So when I speak as a woman and when I experience this set of things as a woman, I'm already sort of co-constituted by all these things. As like you said, it's not an autonomous subject. It is all these things that come into play when I sort of try to think through this experience, try to speak, try to write, and not just this work, but many other work, right? And that's why I keep saying that it's a very difficult balance that one has to do, even while critiquing. It's a difficult balance that, you want to critique the state in a particular way, or you want to critique the community in a particular way, but you also want to articulate that that doesn't mean that the state or the doings of the state is something that is to be appreciated. The state is certainly not the savior in the context that I speak of, right? So it is uh, and also, right, give, okay, and does it need to be from a minority position, right? Given that you speak of ways in which not all communities are represented. Yes, that's also a very important question, right? When I bring in language and I bring in the issue of mother tongue and local language, right? The language that I translate, the language that the Manipuri is not certainly a minority language in Manipur, right? And I have to be aware that that is why I think the issue of mother tongue and local language is something more complicated, because Manipuri as a language is represented in curriculum. Other ethnic languages are not. So when we also talk about loyalty to language or disloyalty to language, there are these certain sets of things. And I think even I think when I speak, or when someone, like when a person who also is a minority in a context, like in the Indian context, I'm a minority, but I'm not a minority in the context of Manipur. And I think these kind of shift of identities is something that actually it must inform our politics, right? So yeah, I think it is uh, I hope it it does, because we have to be aware that what it means to be a peripheral citizen in a particular context, and that experience is something we should bring into our work and our politics when we are clearly not a peripheral citizen in a particular context, right? And that switching is something that we should do. So when I speak as a woman in a particular context, and I speak as a woman in the context of Manipur, I'm certainly a majority person. I'm certainly a person who belongs to and that is why I also take problem with the fact that our community calls itself egalitarian. I think a majority community should, or not call itself egalitarian. I think that is an opinion that should come from the minority ethnicities in that same space, right? What do the other communities think of this majority community who gives itself or speaks itself as egalitarian? What are the sets of relationship, right? So, and that is and I think that I try to do that in my work, and I try to do that when I look at the question of language, because I think it is dishonest when we have a set of experience because of a minority position in one context, but we don't use that lens and we don't use that experience vis-a-vis our relationship with others, who, in a setting where clearly I'm in a hierarchically higher position. So that is something that should, inform the way we do academics and the way we sort of do our research and the way we conduct ourselves. Thank you so much, Papuri. I think that was an important point to be raised.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Haripriya. So I think we'll wind up with this discussion. And thanks again from all of us at CWS for coming and everyone who attended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah. Okay. Bye. Thank you. Okay. Let me stop the recording. Yeah. Okay.